Howdy. This here is Professor UD Guru coming to you from 10,000 miles and 68 and a half years away from where I was born, which is to say I wasn't born yesterday, which don't make me right about anything, don't make me an expert on nothing. Anyway, what the heck, UD Guru, not me. But this is a serious topic today. I'm a little bit nervous, but I'll try not to cry about it. This is going to be a longer movie, so grab your popcorn, and the cure mentioned in the title is going to be saved for the end. Good luck finding it. If you skip all the other stuff, you'll get jinxed and you won't be able to find the punchline. But it's a serious punchline. I'm not joking about any of this, even though it might sound like attempted comedy, but it's really not, because we're talking about my whole entire life here. This here movie is not about classic autism, like, what's his name, Kim Peek, was it, that they based Rain Man on? Loosely, a little bit, sort of. Anyway, there's people who are truly autistic, and then there's people who are on the so-called spectrum, the autism spectrum. It's very popular these days. They used to call that Asperger syndrome, and then they changed it because they're so smart they can't make up their mind. Well, we're going to get into all this stuff. As you can tell, I have a slightly cynical attitude, but I have to tell you, I am firmly on this spectrum. However, I want to warn you in advance that I'm going to tell you why the spectrum doesn't actually exist, that it's a decoy for something else. And that's what we're here to talk about. We're not rehashing the obvious. We're not trying to say something popular to get lots of likes and watches. We're out to pin down the best version of the truth that I can come up with after a lifetime of experience with this exact topic. Okay, not that I ever heard about this when I was a kid, but let's just say that. Well, let's start with a little tiny, teeny bit of background. Autism is, back in the olden days, they used to say that autism was caused by the so-called refrigerator mother, the mother that wasn't very loving or affectionate, and then the child would, not have any social skills, and then they did away with that description. And they said it wasn't scientific, which is their way of saying, well, it was bad marketing to, a woman drags her kid into your office and says, hey, something wrong with my kid. And the psychiatrist points a finger at the mother and said, oh, it's your fault, and you're a refrigerator mother and you don't love your kid. That's bad marketing. They changed all that. They come up with, more sophisticated ways of getting you to write them a big old check at the end of a 50-minute hour. That's just my attitude about the whole thing. It's kind of complicated. I'm going to try not to speak for too many hours here. And by the way, if we are all about unisex and equal opportunity here. Refrigerator mother, refrigerator father, same thing. We just say refrigerator mother because that's the typical thing that they said. They don't say it anymore. Well, I'm going to say that it's probably not 100% false because I like having darts thrown at me. Like I said, it's bad marketing. Well, I'm not trying to sell you nothing, so I can tell the truth that there is parents who don't exactly have a very good idea on how to raise children, and we're going to get into that. There's more than one way to do it, obviously, and there's no right and wrong, black and white way to do it, but there's certain things you want to do if you want to have strong kids with strong social skills, and there's certain other things that you want to do instead if you want your kids to go around avoiding people and hiding in a hobby and stuff like that. So like I said, we're not talking about classical autism, toothpick counters or phone book memorizers. We're talking about people who mimic some traits of classical autism and get called Asperger syndrome or autism spectrum. Okay? All mothers love their children, with a few obvious, exceptions. But we're only talking about mothers who actually do love their children, and some of them have a better way of expressing it than others, and some people have a better idea of what love is than other people. Mothers, fathers. When I say mother, I'm talking about father too. What is love, In our culture, unfortunately, love sells soap. We don't really know what love is, and you can get in an argument with anybody anytime you want by saying, well, I know what love is, and you don't. Instant argument, which proves my point. Nobody actually knows what love is, and I'm not going to address that exactly right here. We'll probably make a movie about that some other time. Let's just say, for example, in my case, I had hover parents, so-called helicopter parents or hover parents, where nothing was actually allowed because everything was dangerous and something could go wrong. So everything was interpreted and enforced according to the worst case scenario, as if the worst case scenario was a real possibility, which of course it always is. But then when you raise children as if everything could go wrong at all times, and then you basically enforce the worst case scenario, what you're going to do is you're going to raise up some children who is afraid of their own shadow. And hello, I'm making a movie here. Okay, well, we live in the Philippines, and we love our children here. They like to make a lot of noise, and generally that's perfectly okay. They walk around the neighborhood. They're like free-range kids, you know what I mean? They go from house to house, and they have a lot of friends, and they do any dang thing they want. That's not true. They don't do any dang thing they want, but they play outside. They have fun. My mama, for example, I'm not going to talk about my parents too much, because one of them's still alive. I don't want her to find out and, disown me. But my mama wouldn't let us play outside after dark. And, sometimes of the year it gets dark pretty early before bedtime. And you just, I don't know about you, but I wanted to go outside and play so bad. You go out in your front yard and play, go out in your backyard and play. What's wrong with playing outside in the dark in your own yard? Okay, that's basically... hover parenting is stupid. I mean, that's not the scientific way to put it, but that's the way it works out. Remember when they canceled Halloween because one person supposedly found a razor blade in their apple? After that, no more Halloween. Parents going on a Halloween trick-or-treating with their kids. It wasn't fun anymore, let me tell you that. I remember the first Halloween we had when there was no more Halloween because your parents had to come with you. Give me a break already. Okay, we're going to make a movie about hover parenting sometime. I suspect that's going to happen one of these times. I had basically a enforcement-oriented mother from a broken home. She herself had a very strict mother and a school marm, literally a school marm, a school teacher who oftentimes went to school on a mule in the country. And then my mama riding behind her on the mule, I suppose, because she was in her class. So one room schoolhouse. I'm talking. I'm only 68, but yeah, this happened to my very own grandmother. She was a school marm, and she rejected 2 husbands, and so I would say my mom was from a somewhat broken home, and so, like I said, enforcement-oriented mother with a strict upbringing, who was afraid of everything because her mama would beat her, if, whip her with a belt or whatever. And then my father was a weak, apologetic man who had weak, bashful, socially clumsy parents. Okay, so I come out with a certain type of personality. I mean, when I come out of my mother, originally I had an outgoing personality. Let's just say I was Professor UD Guru. I had lots of, stuff to say, and I was sociable and friendly, and I had, they say, I don't remember this, but they say I had an actual sense of humor and stuff like that. People are born with a wide open personality. Everybody has their own, because, we got this, they call it astrology. The stars do not determine your personality. The configuration of the stars and planets and your personality are configured by the same thing, which is some part of reality that we don't know much about. Is like in the background somewhere. I call it your configuration. I also call it your true vamicle. Okay, so the human species has a forildi wit. That's the configuration of the whole species, and then each individual has a true vamicle. That's the configuration of you personally. So you got your astrology and you got your numerology, and it's interesting. It's not what I call scientifical, but it's interesting. It's a good conversation starter. So I find these things interesting, but personality is something that everybody has one. And mine changed when I was less than 2 years old. They tell me about this. I don't remember it, but they say that I was totally regressed, went inside, turned into a baby again, and stopped developing personality-wise, or no, stopped developing socially at the age of 1.5. What I'm trying to say is we don't have personality disorders. We have personalities. We get our personality from our parents, from our experiences, our life experiences, from our social setting, from our siblings, neighbors, teachers, everything. We get our personalities from what we experience. So I come out of my mother originally with a wide open personality determined mainly by my psychic configuration, which is not something we actually know very much about or can really describe very well. That's why they have things like astrology and numerology, because they know it's there, but they're trying to figure out a way to describe it. You know what I mean? And then along comes psychology and psychiatry, and they try to turn it into a science. Well, part of this Asperger scam or spam or whatever it is they try to tell us that our brains are wired differently and that this is genetical. Well, it's possible that classical autism might be genetical. I don't know. I don't know that much about genetics and brains and stuff. But I do know that your configuration generally doesn't come from your brain. It comes from reality, something that stands behind everything else and causes our personality and causes the stars to be in a certain configuration when you're born. Reality is infinity. Real reality is infinity. Okay, so we don't actually understand infinity very much. We can hardly even talk about it without starting to spout all kinds of paradoxes and stuff, which makes paradox basically the backbone of reality. But let's not get too deep into abstract philosophy right now. We get our personality from our parents, not from our genetics, parents, etc. All those things I had just listed. So along comes psychology and psychiatry, and then they got useful things that actually will try to classify your personality as a personality, such as the Briggs-Myers. I think that's what they call it. I think it's called Briggs-Myers personality test. For example, I come out as a INTJ. This is similar to astrology and numerology, but they're, coming at it from a different direction, and it's more scientifical than numerology and astrology, because they ask you about questions about what you would do in such a case. I don't remember the test. I've taken it several times, but I'm a INTJ, which is the rarest of the personality types that you can determine in this way. And it's the one, as far as I know, that pretty much corresponds with what they used to call Asperger syndrome, or they now call autism spectrum. So I have 3 diagnoses that come late in life, because when it was early in life for me, they didn't know about this. They weren't putting people on some autism spectrum when I was young. They came along later and started doing that, and I'd only found out about it because some guy, the Fartmeister, I call him, the Fartmeister, found me talking online and said, "Hey, dude, you have Asperger's." Okay, well, I knew I had a personality, and that I knew my personality was not similar in all ways to other people, but I never heard of Asperger's. So I looked it up, and I got all excited. Oh, look at this. I do belong to a group of human beings. It's the Asperger community. I'm a Aspie. And then they eliminated they didn't eliminate, they just changed the name of it to autism spectrum. So now they got Netflix movies, Love on the Spectrum. Oh, jeez, give me a break. I'll try not to be too derisive, because, I did embrace this category with glee for a few years, because suddenly I could go on a internet forum and say what I thought about stuff without people making fun of me. That was a pretty good feeling there for a while. It was nice that people say, "Hey, man, I'm like you." I had me an in-group for not the first time in my life. I mean, I haven't been totally friendless my whole life, but it was at that point I didn't really have much of a social life anymore, because that was for young people. And by the time I was in my 40s, I had moved around so much, I just didn't have many friends left, except I could now make friends with strangers online. Well, anybody could do that, Find anything you agree with, and you can find yourself a Facebook group, or 20 or 30 Facebook groups you can join and have all kinds of so-called friends. But that's not real social life, and you don't need real social skills in order to do that. So I'm going to tell you the whole story of my life someday, not right now. We'll get into that in other movies, because I had a weird life, and I think some of it was pretty interesting. Some people might want to hear about it. But I think I'd have to say that I wasn't the only one who gleefully embraced the autism description, or diagnosis they call it, when I happened upon it, thanks to the Fartmeister. By the way, the Fartmeister, he was the first, my very first internet forum that I was ever on. It was about living in the Philippines, and I had never been to the Philippines yet. But I had me an online sweetheart from the Philippines, so I joined this forum. And the people on there were political conservatives for the most part, and they were giving me a very hard time. And I was just yak, saying what was ever on my mind. And these people were giving me a pretty hard time. And then this guy who was lurking on that forum, I call him the Fartmeister, I forget his real name, he wrote me a personal message, and he said, "Dude, you have Asperger syndrome. You should look into it." Now, the fartmeister, he was somebody who could fart at will. That was his special interest. So I got interested in this topic, and the fartmeister was sending me messages all the time about farting and, sniffing your finger. I eventually kind of dropped him from my social experience too, because who needs friends, Anyway, so my family was just as gleeful as they could be about the fact that I had finally stopped saying there's no such thing as mental illness, and I'm not crazy, and I'm the same as you, but more of it, Because, basically, put it this way, I had 2 older sisters and a mother, and they're all Leos. I'm an Aries with Capricorn rising. My personality is rash, and yet I try to climb ladders, and then about halfway up, I jump off, because I'm not just Capricorn, I'm also Aries with Capricorn rising. So there's a little bit of conflict there, which is why I'm so interesting, because I don't have a boring personality. I have an interesting personality. And in my family, with 3 Leo females older than me in age, you're going to get called all kinds of things, okay? If you have an interesting personality, or, you're an unexpected personality, because, well, let's not get into because right now. I read every book. I watched every YouTube movie. I especially used to read books, because this was really, at this time I hadn't really discovered YouTube. Currently I'm addicted to it, but that's all right. It's something that I find very interesting right now, because if you watch stuff that you're interested in, then they send you more stuff that you're also interested in. So it's pretty easy. I gave up Facebook. Facebook is pointless, and it gets more pointless every year. So my family took the hint, said, yippee, he finally figured out what's wrong with him. Rewind, watch that phrase again, or do you want me to say it again? My family said, yippee, he finally figured out what's wrong with him. Gleeful, that's the word. They gleefully embraced my new self-diagnosis. One of my Leo sisters actually gave me $600 to go to a psychologist and get an official diagnosis. Good golly, Miss Molly. I couldn't believe that a psychologist, someone supposedly in the field of helping people, would charge me $600 to tell me whether or not I had Asperger syndrome. ASSBURGER, Asperger syndrome. I also contacted a university that was doing a study, and this one was free. I joined in their effort, and they did a study, and this is where they said I'm an INTJ, but it wasn't the first time I'd been told I was an INTJ. So I've been told that at least twice in the Meyers-Briggs area, and they were doing a study on Asperger diagnosis of anonymous people. So I was an anonymous member of this study, and they studied my personality. They did various tests, including Briggs-Myers. I think that's what it's called. So I had 2 diagnoses from more or less official sources, one of which was a real psychologist who charged me real money, and also self-diagnosis. So I'd say I can speak on this topic from experience and with a certain amount of authority, and being, an old fart, I might even know what I'm talking about. You got your school shooters. Some of them are, what do they call them, autism spectrum. I think all of them are on psychiatric drugs. Let that be a hint to you. If you don't know why people go crazy in their teens, it might have something to do with psychiatric drugs, which are poisons that they put and then screw up your brain, and they mess up all kinds of things. I'm not an expert on it, but I've despised the whole idea of psychiatric drugs for a long, long time, ever since long before I ever heard about the autism spectrum. Psychiatry and psychology is not a science, but it is a marketing strategy. I'm going to read from my notes here because I want to get it right. It's a marketing strategy for lazy doctors, that is psychiatrists, and meddlesome control freaks, that is psychologists. And most of these people should be seeing a shrink, by the way, and that's why they're doing this. We try to teach what we need to learn. That's the category that these folks should be in, not in the category of science. Psychology, psychiatry is not a science. These people want science's stamp of approval. I'm reading from my notes here. Without the rigor of actually doing any science. That is to say, science is about physical stuff, not spiritual and mental stuff. I'm pretty hardcore believer in that thing I just said. Science is about physical stuff. Physics, stuff you can put in a test tube and test. There is no scientific psychological test for anything, for any kind of behavior. Individuals are individuals, personalities are personalities, not personality disorders. I don't want to make this movie too long, and I don't want to try to prove anything. I'm not trying to prove anything. Like I said, this is about psychology. It's about personalities. You can't prove anything, but I can give my opinion that I can, and I will, and I am. Okay? I think I've pretty much gone over what I wanted to go over. I could rattle on for a lot longer. I could tell my life story. It is an interesting, unique, and weird life story. I think I'll save that for another movie or 12 or 15 movies. But the cure for autism spectrum. Now recall, in case you forgot, I'm not talking about actual autism, you know, the toothpick counters and the phone book memorizers and the people who have absolute zero social skills and don't learn language until they're 3. I mean, I learned language at a normal pace, but I refused to speak to anyone outside of my house until I was like 6 years old or something. That was my personality. It was caused by my social environment, by my parents and stuff, my life experience. The cure for autism spectrum, what they used to call Asperger, it just occurred to me, like it was revealed to me while I was taking my notes for this movie. You've heard of, what's his name? He's an actor, famous actor, Morgan Freeman. He's got a great talking voice, so he does documentaries and stuff. He's got a narrator's voice. He's a smart guy. I like him. I never met him, but you can tell he's a smart guy by the way he talks, you know. So I probably don't agree with him about everything, but I know there's at least one thing I agree with him about, and that is his cure for racism. He said the cure for racism, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, the cure for racism is to stop talking about it. And maybe you can tell I'm no longer on the liberal side of politics, but let's not get into that. I'll make more movies about that some other time. Why I switched sides. Okay, the cure for autism spectrum is to stop talking about it. I used to go around saying, yeah, I'm autistic. My poor autistic brain, you know, I'm going to have the same routines every single day because of my poor autistic brain. I have to put my left foot in front of my right foot in exactly this order and blah, blah, blah. I got to shave myself from the same side of the face every day because I found when I embraced this category, I started mimicking the things that I had read. I started exaggerating these so-called symptoms that provided me with this so-called diagnosis. I started trapping myself in that box because it made me feel happy to be in an in-group for a change. I wasn't insincere. I was lying to myself, but I was sincerely wrong. You know, you can be sincere and still be wrong. It's called being sincerely wrong. I found that for the most part, people did not want to hear, I'm autistic. I'll tell you a little story, okay? I was working as a pizza delivery guy in my late 40s. Let's not get into why I was working as a pizza delivery boy at the age of 47, 48. Let's just say I've had an interesting life, okay? I was a piano tuner for 20 years off and on, but I haven't tuned a piano since 1997, I think, 1996, 1997. I got to work one day, and I'm the oldest guy there. I was, almost twice the age of the guy that owned the business, the manager, owner. And there were some employees. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so there was no business at that exact moment. There was 2 employees, the owner, and another employee, 2 regular employees. So they were the ones who were standing up, and the boss. And I walk in, and there's this other employee who's lying down in one of the booths in the dining room, lying down. And I stopped. I don't know what they're talking about. They're not talking about the fact that this guy's lying down. I was kind of curious personally why this guy was lying down, because he had his uniform on. And why are you lying down? I actually said this because I am fairly unfiltered. I don't know what they're talking about, but I just piped up, dude, why are you lying down? Why are you lying down? Are you on the clock? Why are you lying down in that booth? There's no customers. It's not like it makes any difference, but I was just curious. And this guy is very, very nerdy and, stuff. I didn't get in trouble for asking him that, by the way. But a couple of days later, my boss said to me, I had to fire that guy. And I said, why? Why'd you fire him? And the guy told me, my boss told me the story. He said, well, after he fired this guy for basically not being on the team or something, the dude's mother called, because the dude's like, 19, something like that, 20 years old maybe at the most. His mother called and spoke to the owner and said, why did you fire my son? You can't fire my son. He's autistic. And my boss said to me, I don't know what... No, here's what he said. He said, I never knew what autistic meant, but now I do. Autistic means weird. Okay, well, all right. That's an interesting story. But the idea that this made an impression on me. I didn't forget this. The idea that his mother could call up and say, you can't fire my son for being autistic. Okay, that made an impression on me. I'll tell you what else made an impression on me. A couple of things. Early on in my career as a Aspie person on the Aspergers spectrum, a correspondent of mine who I had known ever since we were kids, I said to him, I decided I'm autistic, I'm Asperger. And he wrote me back and said, yeah, one of my stepsisters is Asperger. And I said, oh, yeah, really? What makes her Asperger? And he wrote me back and said, well, I guess, I don't really know, but I guess it's just, she's a little bit, kind of immature. I never forgot that either. And I was still gleefully embracing the category, but I never forgot that. And when it came time for me to reconsider, that definitely came to mind. Here's another thing that came to mind quite a bit. Before I ever heard about Asperger's, I had this job for about 3 years that I kept quitting. And leaving dirty notes for my boss and said, oh, you're such an asshole, I hate you, and blah, blah, blah. Because he was he was extremely sociable person. We were opposites. Asperger's people would call him neurotypical, NT for short. And so he was Scorpio. I'll tell you about Scorpios and Leos sometime. I have been plagued with Scorpios and Leos my whole life. But he had 2 master's degrees, but he was an alcoholic, and he was very smart, but he hung around with very macho dudes because he was a forester, and I was his office assistant and bookkeeper. But all his friends, all the people he worked for, were these big macho guys that worked chainsaws for a living. And so he was fairly macho too, in spite of having 2 master's degrees. One was a math degree from Cornell, and one was a forestry degree. And he was also a pothead. He's always roaches in the desk drawer. I'm trying to work, and I'm smelling these roaches. Jesus, dude, give me a break. I'm trying to concentrate on my work. And this thing is in the drawer calling to me. Well, I'll get into that topic some other time, too. I no longer have that problem. I did away with it 20 years ago, but I quit this job so many times. We were practically neighbors. We lived very close to each other, but he'd call me and say, please come back to the job. I need you. You did such a good job, and I'll promise to be a nicer boss, and blah, blah, blah. But the last time he called me and begged me, he didn't beg me this time, okay? He said, okay, I'm not going to beg you to come back to work. You can have your job back, but on one condition. He said, I never want to hear about your feelings ever again. And I said, whoa, what the fuck, dude? And he hung up the phone on me, and I never saw him again. That made an impression on me, okay? Because I did have hover parents. I did get way too much attention. I got way too much slack on behavior in some ways. I'll get into hover parents another time. But, yeah, these kids these days, I might sound like an old fogey, and I hope I do, but the deification of weakness, I kind of sound like Kamala Harris right now, except that my topic is the opposite. The deification of weakness is such a trend. It needs to stop. Do not hover parent your kids. We're going to make some more movies. But I just want to end on this note. The deification of weakness. Think about it. This here's Professor UD Guru. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for showing up.